A blackened, shriveled-up penis swam around in a thick, yellow liquid that looked a lot like pickle juice. Dread washed over me as the first investors filed into the room minutes before the start of the meeting. We were expecting 25 attendees, all young, vibrant women with sharp eyes and expensive suits. I would never even have the guts to approach them at a bar, and there I was, minutes away from holding up a dozen boards with hand-drawn penises for their perusal. The impending humiliation rose up my collar, stifling my breath and causing beads of sweat to pool at the crevice of my neck. "Ladies," Chuck began, "I want to start this meeting with a question, and I want you to be honest with yourselves and with us." A pause for dramatic effect. Some raised eyebrows in response to Chuck's candor. Mostly the women were looking at their phones or scribbling something in their notebooks. A general disinterest hung heavy in the recycled air of the rented hall. How many times have you found yourself wallowing your evenings away, too tired to spend another hour in heels? Too worn out to choose what to wear for a date? A few polite smiles, maybe a nod in the back. Definitely more curious eyes flickering between Chuck and me. Maybe it would be okay, I thought, allowing myself to exhale as a drop of sweat rolled into the corner of my eye. I wiped at the sting with the sleeve of my blazer. We all want to relax at the end of a busy day, but the dating scene takes a toll. Too much uncertainty, too many unrealistic expectations. So much time wasted listening to strangers talk about their boring lives. Well, no more. "Paulie," that was my cue to reveal our logo before slowly rotating through the rest of the boards as Chuck spoke. "Order a dick" cuts through the niceties. It gives ladies such as yourselves what they need, when they need it. Learn only the most important facts about your match. Girth, length, pube status, and how soon they can come over. Invisible bolts of electricity circulated the room, teasing the hairs on my arms with static. I had hoped at least someone would find the whole thing funny, maybe assume this was all a joke. But no, they all wore the same expression of shock and disgust. Chuck ran down the list of premium features users could expect, such as a penis-shaped detection algorithm that could eliminate bendies from potential matches. When it comes down to it, we all know that something is off, right? A playful glint entered Chuck's eye as he prepared to close out the presentation. Humanity, how we go about our lives, it's all a big sham. Courting, dating, marriage. When you strip away the layers of imposed societal norms, we all just want a release. Modern dating culture has no room for ladies that just want a good dicking, straight up under 35 minutes delivery. Well, our application is going to change all of that for good. A stunned silence fell upon the hall. I looked at Chuck, who was glowing like he just pitched the next Finding Nemo to Pixar. What black market powder did he sniff to get that much confidence? And where could I get it for the next time I tried getting with a girl? "Mr. Rhodes." A redhead from the back rose in her seat, her eyes burning with incredulity. "You must be aware that the majority of women in this room represent Fortune 500 companies, all gathered here because of the blind trust instilled by your father's legacy." Chuck tilted his head, opening his mouth to respond but thought better of it. A hint of uncertainty appeared on his face. Thin strands of blonde hair fell over his left eye as he looked away from the woman, tugging at the corners of his vest suit as she continued. "I have to assume that you have more common sense than to waste our time with infantile humor. That means you are actually serious about a venture that is so imbecile, so vapid and grossly offensive, that I simply have to stop you from saying another word so that I can leave." That was probably the kindest reaction of the lot. One by one, our group of investors got up from their seats and filed out of the room. A string of mutters flowed in our direction, most containing colorful language as well as an array of personal insults. A cute blonde from the front row made sure to call me a sweaty prick before leaving. At least it was over. 10 minutes later, we got a booth at the downstairs bar. I collapsed in my seat, pulling off the tie and blazer I had borrowed from Chuck's closet that morning. My pits were drenched, and I felt like a giant tool, but at that point, I just had to laugh it off. "Man, we've been through a lot of crazy shit, but this takes the cake," I said to Chuck as he brought over 2 pints. "I hate to say I told you so, but yeah." For weeks, I had been going over to Chuck's to brainstorm his crazy app idea. It all started with a night of heavy drinking and possibly some drug use. The next morning, I woke up to find I had agreed to quit my warehouse job so I could spend all day drawing dicks and phone screens. What can I say? At least the pay was good. Chuck's mind was elsewhere as he slipped into the seat across from me. His eyes traced the patterns on the wallpaper behind me. For as long as I'd known him, my friend had been obsessed with becoming an entrepreneur, hell-bent on coming up with that next big thing that would allow him to live up to the Rhodes family name. Unfortunately, Order a Dick was probably the most coherent idea to date. I was about to say something else when Chuck's phone started buzzing in his pocket. His face lost all color as he glanced at the user ID before answering the call. Probably some, if not all, of the women at the meeting had already complained to reps from his father's company. "Hello, Father." He spoke in a voice so small, so timid, I could barely recognize it. Chuck generally commanded every room he entered, but now he was smaller than a mouse hiding in a wall. "Yes, Father." He squirmed in his seat, shoulders hunched as though he would curl in on himself like an armadillo. His free hand twitched on the table counter before disappearing out of view. "No, Father." Chuck brought out a small, unmarked prescription container, working his fingers to open the lid. He poured 2 white pills on the counter, picking them up with his free hand and bringing them to his mouth. He swallowed dry before taking a gulp of beer to wash them down. I wondered what he was on this time. Chuck had been using one thing or the other since we met at a juvie rehab years ago. I was mostly clean these days with the occasional slip-up, but my friend had the means to support his chemical habits without it getting in the way of his life. "Sorry, Father." With that, the caller hung up, leaving my friend to stare at his phone screen. I noticed his father's caller ID had a photo of the two of them smiling somewhere outside. Only Chuck looked about 5 years old in the picture. Had it really been that long since they'd taken a photo together? It kind of seemed like it. "Hey, man," I tried to comfort him. "Look, we'll get him next time. The work ethic is there. We just have to come up with something a little more vanilla, all right?" Chuck shrugged at my words. Splotches of pink formed on his cheeks as he pulled back his shoulders, narrowing his eyes at me. Something in his gaze made me incapable of keeping eye contact, so I looked down at my own hands. He stared at me for another few moments before downing the last of his beer. "Come in an hour earlier on Monday. We need to reassess the product." With those words, Chuck got up from his seat and left the bar. It was only Wednesday, so I had time to think it through. I had never taken the project very seriously to begin with. It was just a cool way to make a buck and hang out with my friend. Things had changed, though. The meeting with the women had absolutely destroyed what little self-esteem I had left after my recent breakup. I really couldn't go through that again, paid or not. I decided to quit. Monday came. I overslept and struggled to get out of bed. It wasn't just that I had to get up so early, or the fact that the clouds outside my bedroom window seemed determined to choke out any hint of sunshine or happiness. Chuck hadn't returned any of my texts or calls since we parted ways at the bar. He had gone radio silent on social media as well, which was really unlike him. Couldn't blame him, though. A local influencer had picked up the story of our app meeting, and the media was having a field day of tearing the Rhodes family name to shreds. They had dug up everything from Chuck's past, coke blowouts, amateur porn tapes. That one time he accidentally set a Las Vegas brothel on fire. There was a lot. I had to admit, I was worried about the guy. He rarely cared about the yellow press, but he always took the shit with his dad to heart. Based on the one-sided phone conversation I had heard in the bar, Old Man Rhodes was really pissed off this time. I gobbled down a cold bowl of cereal and headed over to Chuck's. He didn't answer the front door when I rang the bell, but he always left the back entrance unlocked for me when we were still working together. So I took a liberty and went inside. The first thing that struck me was the room temperature. I was wearing a hoodie and jeans, yet I felt a jarring chill spread through my arms and legs, biting all the way into my bones. The smell was the second thing. It was a powerful chemical scent that attacked the senses every time you breathed it in. It was like someone had taken all the cleaning supplies in the house and poured them out on Chuck's carpet. I walked through the kitchen and out to the living room, where we had spent so many days working on the app. The curtains were drawn, painting the room in a dreary filter of gray. When my eyes adjusted, I had to do a double take at the changes. Since my last visit, Countless metal storage shelves, a huge chest freezer, and a tall counter with laboratory equipment had replaced the couches and dining table at the center of the room. Vague scribbles danced at the edge of my vision, and I turned around to see that the wall behind me was covered in red marker. Awful word combinations sprang out at me. Chuck's voice screaming 6 slogans from inside my head. Morgue fuck stiffies for you, maggot tits coffin cunts, and about a dozen other sordid titles swam before my eyes. They were a list of apt names, each more obscene than the last, all having something to do with sex and death. To the right, there were incoherent strings of words, chemistry problems, and childish doodles of stick people being torn apart. My head spun as the contents of my stomach started bubbling up at the base of my throat. I was going to be sick. Without even thinking about it, I ran over to the freezer and lifted the lid, figuring it was better to vomit on ice than onto Chuck's fine thread rug. I really wish I hadn't, though. Really fucking wish I'd just puked all over my own clothes. The contents of the freezer revealed stacks of mason jars. I lifted one of the top specimens, curiosity overcoming nausea for a split second before returning in double fold. A blackened, shriveled up penis swam around in a thick, yellow liquid that looked a lot like pickle juice. I yelped in shock, throwing the jar back into the freezer, where the glass broke and the remains of an unknown man's genitals oozed out with the liquid. I threw up then, coating the mummified member in a steaming stew of my cornflakes and milk. I slammed the freezer shut, leaning on the lid as I waited for my legs to turn from liquid jelly to something that could actually support my weight. What had Chuck done? A part of me wanted to turn and run right out of that house, but the decent side of me, the friend side, knew that I had to find Chuck and get him to a professional equipped to handle this level of fucked up. Chuck? I called his name into the silent house, my voice bouncing off the walls in trembling echoes. No reply. I looked over the room again, searching for any clues I may have missed. A small notebook lay on top of the counter near some vials and lab equipment. Something told me it was important, so I pocketed it before heading out into the hall to inspect the rooms. Chuck's house was so big. I'd only ever seen parts of it, so I had no clue where to start my search. After lingering near a hallway closet for several minutes of indecision, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. A melody traveled down the staircase, a cheerful tune that, given the current circumstances, sent shivers through my entire body. Chuck, I called out again as the melody ran its course, putting me through to voicemail. Silence. I stalled for a long time, trying to gather the courage to face whatever lay in wait upstairs. At some point, I just turned my brain to autopilot and ran up the steps, processing my surroundings in a distant corner of my mind. I threw open at least 3 doors, revealing room after empty room. The last door down the hall stood ajar, a faint light spilling from within. That wasn't right, was it? A light on during the day, not right at all. I entered the study. Grand bookcases, handcrafted oak chairs, priceless paintings on the wall, all painted in a thin mist of fresh, crimson spatter. Chuck's body lay in the middle of the room, eyes staring at a single spot on the ceiling. They were wide with a childlike wonder I had never seen before. The rest of his face was barely recognizable, like a pale photocopy from a broken printer. No color in his skin, sunken cheekbones, or cracked lips. His head was in a neat pool of blood, a recent bullet wound glistening red as it oozed a drying stream of blood from the side of his head. The fingers of his right hand were loosely wrapped around a pistol. I managed to keep it together long enough to fish Chuck's phone from his front pocket and call his emergency contact, which was his father. I don't remember what I said, but I must have made enough sense because he promised to set out right away. It's hard to describe what I felt as I sat at the side of my friend's corpse. The grief was one thing, but the guilt of knowing I'd seen warning signs and failed to act was too much. With no one around, I keeled over in sobs, rocking back and forth near a pool of Chuck's blood. I had known about his drug addiction for years and ignored it because I knew he was rich enough to support the habit. I had watched his business ideas grow increasingly more bizarre and dismissed them as whimsy, even profiting from his mental deterioration. I had never thought to help. I had left my friend to die alone at the hands of the drug-fueled monsters in his mind. Paramedics ushered me out of the room, sending me home to rest. I was almost at the front door when Chuck's father arrived. The sight of him sent another jolt of devastation through my body. The keen blue eyes, broad chest, that unmistakable air of self-importance. It was like staring at a snapshot of Chuck from the future. Or it would have been, once, not anymore. Chuck's dad called me a cab and thanked me for doing what I could. I couldn't even respond. There were no words to make any of it okay. A couple of days passed and I received a call inviting me to the funeral. I battled some inner demons before deciding the closest thing to closure would be to go, to stare at the casket, to try and say some sort of goodbye. I was still a mess though, so I got the time completely wrong, showing up at the family mansion a whole hour early. The house staff bounced around the halls in a flurry of activity, shouting orders back and forth as they pulled together last-minute arrangements. It took a while for a butler to come over and ask if I was one of the busboys. After explaining that I was actually a friend of the deceased, the man gave me directions to find the upstairs living room where relatives had already started gathering. I walked up the grand staircase feeling very self-conscious in my blazer and jeans as I passed at least 3 servants who were dressed better than me. The door to the living room was open a sliver, causing my stomach to knot in anguish as I remembered the door to Chuck's study. I lingered before entering, trying to compose myself before facing the family. A fragment of conversation caused me to freeze mid-stride. "Can you believe the sick fuck went to every morgue in town using the family name to gain access to cadavers?" asked a voice that sounded exactly like Chuck's, down to the intonation. "Yeah, what the hell, Richard? You never mentioned such severe side effects." I stepped aside, flattening my back against the wall. Peering through the cracked door, I saw 4 men in black suits standing around a table, facing the other way. I had only ever seen Mr. Rhodes, but it was easy to recognize the rest of the men. They were Chuck's 3 older brothers. "What do you all think? That psychiatry is a precise science?" I gave him the blacklisted stuff from the Rhodes Pharma suicide trials. He was always going to get there. Just the methods used were out of my control. "I'm up for re-election next quarter. I can't have this getting out." "I've handled everything," Chuck's father raised his voice, causing the brothers to fall silent for a minute. "I have to say this, and then I'll back off," the third brother spoke up. "I've been saying for years we should have staged an overdose at one of his rehabs. Now we can't even milk the media for sympathy for the family, because it could encourage someone to come forward about the body parts. What about the half-wit that found him? How much did he see?" the first brother continued, ignoring the previous remarks. Chuck's father was about to reply, but hesitated. He half turned his neck toward me, revealing his profile before he spoke. "I don't think he will be a problem." The corners of his mouth lifted, forming a calculated sneer. "In fact, I know he won't be." Sweat pooled in my fists as Chuck's father turned to face me, his eyes bearing into mine with lethal humor. I stumbled back from the doorway, my legs dow, my mind pounding. Mr. Rhodes didn't flinch or make any attempt to follow as I turned on my heel and sprinted down the stairs, through the halls and out the door. I got in my car and drove right out of town. Drove for hours until I had to stop for gas and actually process what had happened. It was already after sundown when I found myself at a filthy gas station diner. I ordered a pot of coffee as I tried to make sense of what I'd heard. I knew what it sounded like, but could I have misunderstood? Was I overreacting? That's when I remembered the notebook, still tucked away in the pocket of the blazer I wore to Chuck's on the day I found him lying dead on the floor. It was a journal. I leafed through the pages, stomach turning as I read entries about my friend's growing obsession with death, decaying body parts, and revived appendages that could be sold for sex. But that wasn't the part that killed me. There was a short entry from the evening before I discovered his body. Sunday 10 p.m. The pills are actually working. I'm surprised. When Richard said the pills would help me stay sober, I thought he was full of shit. I know he fucking hates me. I know all my brothers do. They think I'm a joke. Fucking pricks, the lot of them, acting like they'd be anywhere without father's money. I'll show them. Today marks 30 days. It's only my first serious chip, but it's something. Tomorrow I'll show it to Dad. Show him I'm serious this time. I have a revised pitch prepared too. I know once I show him the work, the effort I put into it, he'll be proud. I know he will. Then maybe he will love me. I don't know if the pills did it, or if Chuck's father actually came over that morning to end his son's life. Maybe he didn't have to even pull the trigger. Maybe his general rejection was enough to drive Chuck over the edge. I also have no idea why they would do that in the first place. Sure, he was a wild one, but damn, he was their son and brother, man. What I do know is that I wish I never got involved in any of this shit. I don't think it's safe to go home, and I don't know if I can trust the authorities. So I'll just keep driving until I figure it all out. Fucking rich people, am I right?